Okay, everybody, we're going to get started here. Thanks for coming to our first Friday night lecture of the season. Tonight, our speaker has been with the National Weather Service for years and years and years.
42 years.
42 years. He's been known to climb a mountain or two, and he's also was a pretty good friend of George Burns. So without further ado,
There's a few stories there.
here's Mr. Carl Garczynski.
As you all know, I'm retired now since 2009. I do a little contract work on the side, so I keep my mind active. I wish I could keep my body as active all the time. I'm told that you stay young in mind, you're going to live a long time. So we're going to see what happens. 86 now. And but anyway, I thought tonight I'd talk about some of the new things that are taking place in the weather business, and hopefully helping to forecast the weather a little better. As you know, prior to World War II, weather forecasting was just a good guess. Even though we made attempts at it, the Weather Bureau was started in 1913, and the different specialties derived from that, and some of those specialties have been reduced because of the modernization that's taking place, basically digitalization with computers and everything. Probably the biggest change has taken place since World War II. And the big change that helped us there was the B-29 bombers. They used to fly their missions above 30,000 feet. Well, they bumped into the jet stream. And we didn't know much about the jet stream until that time. And then once we found out about the jet stream, which is the steering mechanism for the weather systems on the surface, then we began to take off like a blaze of fire. And of course, satellites came along, and we get beautiful satellite pictures nowadays. Get a variety of satellite pictures, infrared, get visual pictures. And before the night's out, I'm going to give you a website that you can tie into and pick up some of this data. It's out of San Diego, of course. We fall under their area of responsibility. And but anyway, the big advance in satellites is the fact that we have a variety of them, and we have stationary, geostationary satellites, and we have satellites that are constantly rotating around the Earth. There's a couple of weather satellites that you can see in the evening that come almost directly over the valley from north to south, and they're moving pretty fast, so they stick out quite a bit. They're moving about 24,000 miles an hour, something like that. Yeah. So they circle the Earth every 90 minutes. So. And but they're taking pictures day and night of the weather, and as a consequence, giving us a better understanding of the weather. One clue that people have not thought much about is why do we need all this weather information? Our lifestyles. The industry that's about us needs to know this information in order to proceed at a general rate. One fellow, a senator, I won't name him, but he questioned, he said, what was wrong with the old Weather Bureau? And I said, well, nothing if you don't like accurate forecasts. But when they first started making forecasts with the Weather Service back in the teens, 1913 was actually marks a big one. because a big freeze hit California really hard. And so the senators got to work on getting things together, even though the Weather Bureau is a derivative of the Signal Corps in the Army. And they had most of that responsibility until the early 1900s, especially 1913. California got burned out pretty bad by freezes. And the temperatures were outrageously low. Almost ruined the citrus industry state. And as a consequence, Congress was asked the people with know-how to get the Weather Service going, get it cranked up a little bit more. And we didn't make a big move until after that. The biggest move in the interim was to make stations to gather data. Because if you don't know what the weather's been, you're not going to know what it's going to be. And so the more data you have, the more accurate the future forecast is. And so along the way, we've discovered how to take observations and what we call radio sounds. That's to release a balloon with an electronic instrument on it that sends back a signal to us that gives us the temperature, the moisture, the wind direction, the wind speed. And we can plot this on a map. Not only on a map on the horizontal, but also on the vertical, all the way up to 120,000 feet. The balloons get the size of this room before they break. Can you imagine that? They start out, they're about 6 feet. And, but anyway, since the 30s, we've been using those balloons to investigate the atmosphere. And along the way, we're tabulating data from that weather system that passed by. And so we can, nowadays, with the computers the way they are, we can look it up. When did this occur last? What happened ahead of it? And then make a decent forecast, much better than what we had before. If you got a 3-day accurate forecast 50 years ago, you were fortunate, yes. Nowadays, we're shooting for 7 to 10 days, and we're getting better at it. But the whole thing is, it was unimaginable before World War II that we would be able to weather the forecast for 7 to 10 days. And along with that instrumentation that took place all over the world, not just in the United States and Canada, but Mexico was pretty much involved, but we had helped to head up that program in Mexico because of political things going on in Mexico. And these upper air stations are very valuable to us. Here in California, we have 3 of them, as a matter of fact, that release balloons. And but throughout the United States, Alaska, and Canada, we have 120 stations that twice a day, every 12 hours, they release a balloon with the electronic instrument on it. And we archive that data. And nowadays, of course, with computers the way they are, it's relatively simple to do that. And so it makes making weather forecasts a little bit more reasonable, confident, let's say, that you're going to be able to make a decent forecast. It used to be, if we made a 3-day forecast, we were fortunate to be 75% correct. But I'm going to give you a little clue here in the Coachella Valley. If you forecast tomorrow it's going to be just like today, you're going to be right 75% of the time. As you know, but just general observation. And we're very fortunate here in the valley, but the weather business in general is a little shaky because with all the technology that comes along, we're beginning to lose personnel because Congress cuts personnel that if you don't need them anymore, of course, they don't find a place to put them, they retire them. And probably that's what happened to me. Because I specialized in agricultural meteorology and fire weather meteorology. I don't know how many of you knew it, But for 35 years, I would take my family and go up to Pendleton, Oregon during the summer months. So, and I've been going up to the Portland area ever since I got out of the weather business. And I stay with my daughter, who has her family up there. And they asked me about the weather situation, and we don't need so many people anymore because of computerization. Communicate with each other a little bit better than before. When I first got into the business, we were still used teletypes. And so as I advanced, my career advanced along with that. Fortunately, I've been lucky in a lot of aspects. But one cute story is coming along in my career, I had an opportunity to go back to San Jose State and get my master's degree. The Weather Service thought I needed some education, so they sent me back to school. And while I was there, Dr. Miller was the head of the department, and he wanted to take advantage of my experience. So he had me teach a class called Synoptic Meteorology, which is for beginning meteorologists, essentially, to break into it. And I mentioned to the students one day, about 2 weeks into the semester, I said, you all want to be a meteorologist. Have you looked at it and analyzed it thoroughly? And they said, well, as thoroughly as we thought we did. But there were about 16 of them. And I told them, I said, you're either going to be a forecaster for the weather services in the military, or you're going to work for the National Science Foundation, or 80% of you are going to work for the National Weather Service. And what that entails is working rotating shifts. The weather doesn't take a break, go to sleep at night. So we've got to be around 24 hours a day. And I said, we're rotating shifts. The day shift, the evening shift, and then the mid shift, which is dreaded from midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning, as you might imagine. But I mentioned to him, I said, more than likely you're going to be working rotating shifts at the beginning of your career, especially the first 10 years. You're going to be working rotating shifts so that everybody gets a turn at working days. And I had to go through that too. I did for the first 10 years that I was with the Weather Service. But I had some other interesting things happen prior to that I'll point out to you. But anyway, after telling them this disappointment about their career, if they're going to go work for the National Weather Service, well, number one, you're going to go work for the government. That's not too looked upon very well in society today, but that's one of the few places that have lots of jobs in the weather. National Science Foundation has about 10% meteorologists compared to the National Weather Service. But anyway, after that lecture, we lost half the class. And the chairman, Dr. Miller, came up to me and says, Carl, what did you say that you got frightened off? Well, I told him the physics and the math was too hard. And, but I told the true story. I told him, I told him in reality what's going to be happening to them. The best they find out now, rather than into the career of 3 or 4 years. And, but anyway, that was an interesting story to come out of that. Had a good time. And came back to the Coachella Valley. Things were the same. I tried to improve them. And well, I don't know if you all know about it, but Bob Coran was at the Water District for most of my career as well, in one capacity or another.
You were there a little bit before me. Come on, Carl, I'm 96, all right?
And, but anyway, I moved to the Valley from Phoenix in 1966 and tried to improve the weather forecasting system, and I think we were fortunate to do that. We ended up getting a NOAA radio to help disseminate the information. But I was on 5 radio stations and 2 television stations at one time. So I had to narrow that down a little bit because I was wearing myself to a fizzle, trying to satisfy everybody's needs. And there wasn't a need for all of that. People wanted to find out the weather, find out the time that the weather came on the radio, on a certain station. And so I ended up working, I didn't work for them, I gave it, it was a public service essentially. But 3 radio stations pretty consistently, and then worked on TV for about 12 years in the 80s. And the government made me get off the TV because I was competing with somebody else that wanted that job. Well, nobody took the job after I got fired. I stayed on as long as I could, but this gentleman that was a retired meteorologist insisted that I not compete with him, even though we didn't plan on taking over the job. And so here we were stuck without somebody on TV, a knowledgeable meteorologist. I can assure you that none of those people that are on TV today in our valley that profess to be meteorologists are meteorologists. They have a certificate of meteorology. And but it's, the word professional meteorologist is used too loosely nowadays. I wish they would tighten it up a little bit because it's misleading to the public. Nowadays, you got to be a good-looking woman. It's one of the qualifications. So, Paul.
Yeah, Carl, to that end, because I know about all your years down at the Coachella Valley Water District, basically doing agricultural weather for the farm community because it was so important to them. Whereas I might have a bad hair day because of what was going to go on with the weather. They may have a bad season or a lost season if the weather went the wrong way.
Right.
So I know one of the biggest innovations that what the public thinks is an innovation was when you started getting satellite photos. You were the first one in the entire valley to have that Unifax machine in your office, and you actually had, whereas opposed to the people with the bars and the graphs and the bar, you know, going across the country and trying to explain. Did the satellite pictures really help you that much? Because I know, like, for the modern day television person,
Oh, yes.
yeah, they couldn't do what they do without that.
And I'd go out and talk to the farmers and see what their experiences were. And it had gotten so that I got so good at it that I could forecast the frost within 1 degree and for how long it was going to be there. Pretty damn close. You know, close enough that they wanted to keep me. And did that for 42 years. So.
But I was going to say, was your understanding of not so much the picture as it was all that information that came in that really,
Yes.
how you did your job?
Yeah, but the water district, of course, was very cooperative when they first came here. A fellow by the name of Dale Harris came here, my predecessor, in 1954. And then in 1966, I was an aviation forecaster over in Phoenix. And then the ag forecaster, a fellow by the name of Jack Smith, got ill at Phoenix, took care of the Salt River Valley, did the agricultural forecast for the Salt River Valley. And so the meteorologist in charge of Phoenix asked me to take over while he was recuperating because I was curious enough about his job. When I had a free moment from aviation, I was over in the ag section looking at things. And so they found out about this in Salt Lake City and they asked me to come over here and take Dale Harris's place when he was asked to take the in-charge job of the Western agricultural forecasters out of Riverside. And so that's how I got here, and it was one of the best moves we made. Yes?
You know, when you talk about the forecast is primarily historical, you can predict the future by looking at the day before. Maybe that's tongue in cheek, but do you use projections based on some sort of algorithms rather than basing it on historical patterns. You look at where the clouds are pulling, you say, it's gonna go there.
Oh, yes, yes. And the best clue that we have is past weather.
Yeah,
And the better we record that weather, both vertically and horizontally, the more accurate forecasts are going to be in the future. You know, right now we're working on that 7 to 10 day forecast, and we're getting pretty good at it. I'm hoping before I leave this earth that we'll have it down where it'd be more public. Now it's not as public as we would like it to be.
but Irma, there wasn't any predecessor for Irma, did they base that on projections or something that was building up in the ocean due to the warming, or what was it?
Yes. Yeah.
All of the above.
Yeah, they used to make 3 to 5 day forecasts relatively well. And with simple tools compared to what we have today. So, but anyway, to continue on, some of the interesting aspects of my job have been the fire weather aspect as well as the ag aspect. I like both of them. If they ever asked me in the Weather Bureau, they said, what would you rather do, Carl? Permanently, ag weather or fire weather? I don't know which one I would pick, because I love the fire weather too because of the excitement. You know, they send us out to the fire, so you're right on the site of the fire making a forecast for them. And that was a lot of fun. I tried not to express that when I was on a fire, that it was fun. But I enjoyed the excitement. Yes, yes, exactly. And then along the way, I acquired some skills mountain climbing. When I was in the service, I was at China Lake, the Naval Weapons Test Center at Ridgecrest there. And while I was there, they had a mountain rescue team. And so I joined them to learn how to mountain climb. And so I was there for a year, and I volunteered to go to the Antarctic. And I went to the Antarctic in 1958 during the International Geophysical Year. Actually got there in November of '57 and got out of there in February of '59. So, and beautiful experience. I just loved every moment of it, even some of the bad stuff. Had to go on a rescue mission. The airplane had crashed about 35 miles from the station, and seeing I had the mountain experience, they asked me to lead the expedition. And when we got to it, 7 of the people on the plane had already died, most of them on impact. But we were able to save 7 of them, but all 7 of those had to have amputations. The cargo they were carrying, it was a C-124 cargo plane, was lumber. And so that scattered all over the place and made a mess of those things. But anyways, one of the interesting things when we got there, the reason that they'd been sent, it was too far away from the helicopter base at McMurdo Sound for them to get to the accident. So that's when they asked us to go on foot. And we were out for 2 days, and then they finally figured out how to get a helicopter up there. They take the bladder up in another plane and land on the ice someplace and have the helicopter refuel and come up and rescue the people off the mountain, including myself. So I didn't have to walk back down. But, and in that experience, I studied along with other disciplines on the base, and I acquired an insatiable curiosity about science, even though I was just getting started in the science business. And then 2 years later, the National Science Foundation found me and asked me to go back down as the scientific leader at Bird Station. So that was too tempting to refuse it. But in the interim, I had gotten married and asked my wife about the situation, you know. She says, it's what you love doing. She said, maybe you love excitement, and you're gonna find it. And, but anyway, that was another successful year as far as I was concerned, following the disciplines of other people and so forth. And, my career here in the Coachella Valley will probably follow me more than anything else. I got a nice Bob Howie award from the Riverside County Farm Bureau. Came from the Capitol resolution pointing out that I was one of the more favorable farmers in the valley. But anyway, that was a nice award. But in my climbing career, when I was up in the Pacific Northwest, when we weren't having very many fires, I'd usually out hiking or climbing. And along the way, I got a reputation as being a good climber, along with being a meteorologist. And so I got invited to be on the 1992 U.S. Mount Everest expedition. And the unique part of that one was, it was on the north side. And as you probably are aware, China controlled the north side in Tibet. And we were the first expedition since China took over Tibet. So it was quite a distinction. And we did summit, but we got close. We got 28,000 feet. I could taste it. But it was quite an experience. So, and those were some of the highlights in my life, and some of the adventure that went along with being a meteorologist. Yes.
Well, I was just gonna say, I know you didn't make Everest, but you got Kilimanjaro under your belt there, didn't you?
I didn't summit Everest, but I summited all the other 8,000 meter peaks on the continents, the highest mountain on each continent in that sense. Kilimanjaro in Africa, and Kosciuszko in Australia, and McKinley. McKinley was my first one, and that's actually my low. That was a beautiful, beautiful trip. And McKinley is 20,230 feet, so it's quite high. And it's so goddamn north, it makes it cold all the time. You don't know what the seasons are. And then, of course, in Europe, it's Mount Elbrus in the Cossack Mountains in Russia. And it's a little bit less than 20,000 feet. So, and the one in South America has a real neat name to it, Aconcagua. Yeah, it's 23,000 feet. It's the highest mountain outside the Himalayas. But in conquering all of those, well, in the Antarctic also, is one called Vincent Massive. It's only about 16,000 feet high, but the altitude doesn't harm you, but the cold air does. It's minus 35 all the way up to the top. Yeah. And so anyway, that's some of my life, some of the things that are happening in meteorology. And we'll continue to advance now the way it looks. There's a lot more room for new things to come about. And I read the meteorological journals quite regularly to see what's going on, and I stay informed through the National Science Foundation on meteorological things that are going on around the world. They're thinking of starting up another International Geophysical Year in the Antarctic especially, because the ice is melting very fast, faster than when we were there. We first discovered it in 1958, that it was melting faster than previous years because the water underneath the continent is warmer. The oceans have developed a current underneath the Antarctic Ocean. And that is true today as well. And some thoughts along those lines, and the weather changing. We're in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Until we get a firmer control on it, one of the biggest issues that involve the weather change is population. But from all the statistics I hear now, is the populations of the various countries that are overpopulated are decreasing quite rapidly. They're going down to 1 or 2 children by themselves without the government having to tell them. And there's some room for improvement there, and we're seeing it. The other, of course, is improving the atmosphere. But we got a big one coming up that's going to hurt us badly, and that is the methane release from permafrost melting. Methane is 21 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And we saw a big jump in it this summer in the Arctic. There isn't much permafrost in the Antarctic. Just a little bit, less than 10% of what's in the Arctic. But that's where the big jolt is going to come from next. We saw one this summer. Next summer, we'll really tell a story as to how much methane is going to give us trouble. But we don't seem to be able to get a decent handle on controlling gasoline. And I wish I had the answer. And but anyway, I have a great deal of confidence in mankind that when his livelihood is threatened, he'll do something about it. And to some extent, he cares about himself as well, but mainly the livelihood. When I say that, it's primarily connected to agriculture. Look at Ukraine this summer. They had the 4th largest wheat production of all the countries in the world, and they're still under war conditions. But if you take that away, some of the world is going to go starving. It's going to be tough for them to manage. But here in the United States, of course, our agriculture is doing exceptionally well. They have some difficulties along the way, managing the market and so forth. But overall, most of the agricultural land in the United States is being utilized. But, just any other questions?
Can you comment on the drought? Are we going to get out of the drought anytime soon? Can you forecast that?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Soon?
There's some evidence that that will be taking place probably in the next 3 to 5 years. But even though we have a drought relief coming, the other problems that are facing us, of course, are much worse because they're worldwide, of course. But the drought here in California looks like there's going to be some improvement in 3 to 5 years. So we've got to carry on as we can, the best we can. The water situation, of course, is really bad. I don't know what we're going to do about the water in California, especially Southern California. Lake Mead's going to go almost dry, as Lake Powell will as well. But we should have anticipated that maybe a little bit more and had some other facilities built to store water. So Anybody else? Bob? Oh, okay.
You spoke of being able to predict, the last 3 days, the next 3 days, but that's sort of a temporary versus like she's talking about the long-term droughts and the long-term increase in like hurricanes and things like that,
Yes.
forecasting those.
Yes, we can forecast that and within reasonable doubt, yeah. And it's not looking pretty.
Not
Yeah,
looking,
no, no. I was hoping that there would be a big break in the weather, but what's shooting that down is the fact that our winter hasn't started yet. The westerlies that usually come down and bring our weather in from the west and the northwest are failing to do so. But I see some hope around the 28th of the month, sometime between the 28th and the 2nd of November. There'll be a fairly big change where we won't see 90s anymore or something like that. But and maybe some moisture might come down our way. All we need is a little bit here in the desert, but it sure would be nice to get some snow up in the mountains for water's sake. Yeah. And here in the Coachella Valley, I don't know, Bob knows more about it than I do, but water storage, we've been very successful at it. We have 2 aquifers, the North Aquifer, but where the Cliff House restaurant is, that cliff that they're hanging on goes under the desert right there all the way across the San Andreas Fault. And so it blocks the water on the North Aquifer to stay north of that, and the water from the South Aquifer to stay south. Most of the water in the South Aquifer has to be replenished either by natural rainfall, flooding, but the water district, Coachella Valley Water District, pumps water underground to help sustain that water level. We were in trouble about 25, 30 years ago. We were mining the water, as it's called, not replacing it, not making sure there was a way of replacing it. The north, of course, got all these tributaries into the aquifer coming out of the mountains. And they're pretty regular. They're not as abundant as I would like. I'd like to see it overflow. When I first came here in '66, we had artesian wells in the North Palm Springs area, right next to the freeway, as a matter of fact. There were a couple. Right where the rest stop is, there was a big one. Water was shooting up 4 or 5 feet out of the ground. And I don't know if we'll see that again. I hope we do someday. But any more questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
These water bores, it seems like everything's fine, and that's the political. And then all of a sudden you get a notice that we're in a drought and we have to ration. And they think, gosh, you've been on the board now for 5 years. Do they look at it, do they talk to people like you to realize what a crisis is coming? Or do they just look at the bubble and the hose and say, okay, now we got a problem?
Well, we got a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the board doesn't really, do they communicate with you guys to get information on what's the likelihood of continued water deprivation is or shortages?
Yes.
They do?
Yeah.
And then they just sit there and,
The water issue is delicate, as you know.
yeah.
And, yeah, especially here when we look at the desert. And I pointed this question out to people. We've been very conservative with our water. We don't abuse it as bad as other places. And as a consequence, we've got a fairly decent reserve, both on the North Aquifer and the Southern Aquifer. Speaking of water.
Carl, I came here in 1964 from Canada, from Ottawa, and we had the most severe weather in the wintertime. We would get snow starting in October and it would end up in April or May. It was horrendous. That's why I came down here, came for this weekend, and loved it here, and I've been here ever since, year round. I don't go anywhere, I don't go to Portland in the summer. I love the heat. But do you think all this hurrah about the weather changing is not just a natural occurrence anyway? I know that we've done some damage with all this, but when I was here in 64, they said our aquifers will never dry out. We had our own little, I live on the corner of Toro Peak and Fairway, we had our own little, what do you call it when it's a private, a well. We had our own well, and of course Coachella Valley Water gobbled that up, and ever since I've had nothing but problems with my water over there.
Can't do that now.
But don't you think a lot of this is a natural occurrence anyway?
Yeah. Yes, we're gonna see this this isn't the end of this current water situation. We'll satisfy some of our needs with the winter storms that are coming in line, which are more than last winter. And, but we're not gonna solve the problem immediately.
Well, no, I mean, and they've been talking about the Salton Sea since 1964.
Yeah, the Salton Sea, we should forget about it. I wouldn't spend $93 million on it, I'll tell you that.
Well, I saw a plan though that made kind of sense for me, that they would have little, you know, we're on the Pacific Flyway. We have a lot of fabulous birds that go back and forth in our area. I mean, you go down to the Salton Sea area and some of those birding things, and it's fantastic. But it had like little islands instead of just being all water and stuff like that, so at least the birds could.
I moved here just at the end of that era. I remember taking my boys down to the Salton Sea to see the boat races.
Yeah.
And, but back to the water situation, I'm afraid that we have managed our water so well, particularly the Coachella Valley Water District, that we're going to have to give it to Los Angeles. There's no alternative. Bob and I have talked about this extensively. You can write all the laws you want that they can't come and have your water. How the hell are you going to keep 24 million people from being thirsty? You know, just goodwill. We'll have to give them some water. And the little bit they get, it's going to end up to be more. And then our water situation is going to be in trouble. That's from my perspective.
Aren't they going to make more desaltation plants for the coast?
Yes, that's right. As a matter of fact, we have two of them now, I think. There's one in...
one in El Segundo, the one in Santa Barbara they let die out.
Right.
But there's probably others.
One in San Diego, I think.
Yeah.
There's one in San Diego.
It's a practical way to go. Right now, though, it's quite expensive. Its cost for a gallon of water is about the same as a gallon of diesel fuel. Yeah, so you can see that that's not going to last long if we have to depend on it. But perhaps we'll find better ways. Solar desalination. Yeah.
My son-in-law is water waste treatment over in Riverside. And that's the big trend right now is they're no longer just dumping the water back into the ponds and the creeks. They're actually putting it right back into our water system. But of course, they don't want to tell very many people that. They are saving an incredible amount of water now that they don't save just, about half a dozen years ago.
That's right. Yeah.
They are making a lot of strides just in that area.
Any other questions?
You were going to give us some websites.
I'm sorry?
You were going to tell us some websites.
Oh, yes, I was going to point out that website. Yeah. I usually had it memorized when I was working. But the website in San Diego for the San Diego Weather Service, yeah, it's www.weather, spelled out, .gov, G-O-V, / so if anybody else is writing this down, / SGX backslash. That's the letter code for the San Diego Weather Station. SGX.
Got another question there.
And if you go to that website, you'll have a fascinating time. If you have the time and sit down at a computer, like most retired people sit down for about an hour, I think, almost every day at a computer looking for new stuff and going over old stuff. But yeah, I'm pretty well tied into it. But you can get some beautiful satellite pictures on that site. Yeah.
One of the things I found most interesting about weather was about the Galveston flood in the 1900s, when things were so antiquated, and to listen to the story of how they wouldn't listen to Cuba's weather reports, and the whole city got, the book was written about it. Who's the guy that wrote about Lusitania?
Are you talking about Isaac Storm?
Yeah,
About the-
Isaac Storm, yeah.
One of the
That's
best
a
books I've ever read.
fascinating book about weather and
That's how
forecast.
antiquated they were. Yeah, yeah. That, I can assure you that wouldn't happen today.
And how many they lost.
Yeah, wow.
Okay. Kind of question and comment here, Brett. You were talking about military meteorology. Of course, Eisenhower was right over here. And, you know, when he was asked about the success of D-Day, going from June 5th to June 6th, says, you know, what was your greatest advantage over the Germans? He said, our meteorologists.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the famous meteorologists that made that forecast on Normandy Day used to live, he passed away not long ago, but he lived in Palm Springs. Yeah.
And then this most recent storm that we had, is that like the tail end of the monsoon? It sure did seem like it came up from the south. Last week we had a little, almost a half inch there.
Right. The reason for that is they're usually portions of a disturbance, usually a hurricane,
Yeah.
but they don't stay intact when they get up and make landfall over Baja
Yeah.
and then northern Sea of Cortez, but they bring in the moisture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, we've had several devastations, you know. Most of this place was wiped out in '76. You know, the streets were wiped out. And we almost lost our entire Palm Desert Zoo. The Libby Desert was almost lost entirely. And that won't happen now because we built a dam up there, the Dead Indian Dam, that diversionary dike that goes up against the mountains over here. So, yes,
And then the last thing I want to ask you about, because I always found this a fun little entertaining story about how, you know, here we have all the Hollywood people and the radio people. Of course, you did your little commercial thing with George Burns there for a while, and he is of the era of Jack Benny. And I remember Jack Benny and his writers were always looking for funny things, especially when it came to calling out the names of the town along the rail track. The funniest name was Cucamonga. And you told me how they came up with that because, as you know and I know,
yes,
there's no train in Cucamonga. How the hell did they come up with that?
yes. Just by coincidence, I guess. But I'll tell you a few incidences that I've had with some of our celebrities. I think one of the nicer ones is the first time I met Bob Hope. Ernie Dunleavy, I don't know if you remember him, but he used to own the Radio Women's Country Club. And he was on the committee when the Bob Hope Classic started. And after they had been going for about 3 years or so, he invited me to come and meet the board of directors. And so in doing that, this was 1969, he had a big oval table in his office, and went around to each one of the committee members and shook their hand, and he said what they did, the responsibility was. Then I sat on the end of the table the other side. Well, went out, got Bob Hope and brought him in, and introduced them to everybody the same way, telling them what they were responsible for. And he got to me and he said, "This is Carl Garczynski. He's going to be our weatherman for the class thing." And so I got him to shake his hand, and I said, "And what is it you do?" So we got a big laugh. And the other one was, I met him one time at the Indian Wells Country Club. My mother was out visiting from Milwaukee. I'm from Wisconsin originally. And so I thought I'd take her out one day, even though we didn't go out on the golf course. We just set up and stand by the clubhouse. But as we were going up into the clubhouse, Bob Hope came up and he recognized me, which just surprised the hell out of me, a little peon like myself. And he said, "Hey, Carl." He walked over, he left Dolores with one of the other women, came over, and he says, "How are you?" And I said, "I'm doing fine, Bob." He says, "I'm assuming this is your mother." And I said, "Yes, that is." And shook her hand. She didn't wash her hand for a month. So then my little episodes with George Burns. He called me one day, and the Southern California Edison wanted him to participate in some advertising for evaporative coolers. And so he called me. No, he didn't call me first. The first was, I can't remember his name. Do you remember, Bob? The fellow that headed up for a long time?
Edison?
He was a
the guy that was
board of directors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's getting.
I'll remember you keep
Okay. But anyway, he called me and he said, "Carl, we'd like for you to do a commercial with Bob Hope, not Bob Hope, George Burns, to advertise evaporative coolers, the betterment of them." And so I said, "No, I'm a little shy of that." He said, "Let me call you back tomorrow. You think about it tonight." So I talked it over with the wife. She was elated. She said, "By all means, please do that." And the kids were so excited. I had 5 children. Matter of fact, one of my boys went to school with Bob. All the way through high school, I believe, Bob, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They both turned out well.
Yeah, but Matt did, yeah.
And, but anyway, so the second day, they had George Burns call me. And he called, he says, "Carl, I think you ought to help with this situation." And I said, "Well, I'm not sure of that." He said, "But you're going to have to change your name." He says, "You're going to have to change it to something else, something like Smith." And I said, "That's going to sound strange, Smith Garczynski." So he said to me, he said, "Who writes for you?" So I did 4 commercials with him. It was a lot of fun. But at the studio in Hollywood, he had a cigar, of course, as he normally does. And I asked him, I said, "You know, you're never smoking that damn thing, but you're just chewing on it." And he says, "That isn't it, Carl. I need something to hang on to." So anyway, I had a few of those adventures in my life. So all in all, I have no complaints, except my wife leaving early. Yeah. Yes.
Can you explain to us why the Coachella Valley is so unique in telling the weather? Like before you had all the equipment that they have now?
Well, it's very unique in weather. The fact that we have the mountain slopes that we can get up and get out of the stormy weather, sandstorms and so forth. People that are down on the flats, of course, and in the ag area have to put up with the wind. But that's not so bad compared to the rest of the year. I mean, I would say 95% of the time, the weather's favorable here in the Coachella Valley.
That's
Even
because you
with
go to work and it's
even
dark.
with excessive heat. Yeah, even with excessive heat that we have. And the strange thing is about this one is it's not breaking the way it normally does. Usually, I tell people, and I used to tell the farmers this, by the 15th of October, we should see a substantial break in the weather, temperature-wise. We're not seeing that this year. We're not going to see it until the 28th. And so it's 2 weeks late. So I'm wondering if winter's going to be prolonged by 2 weeks on the other end. So, and but it's posing a lot of questions. And sometimes I pester the people over at San Diego. I think too much, because they used to call me for information. They don't do that anymore. So, anyway, folks, it was nice talking to you this evening. I hope I